Well, good afternoon, Todd. We're doing it live on LinkedIn again. It's our third AI live chat, and today we're talking about the AI ROI. We're just going to go straight into it. How do you define ROI for AI? Is it cost savings, revenue lift, or something else? Yep.
Yeah.
Estimations.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. And I think I'm guessing most people probably know this because the stats are all over the world at the moment, all over the web. This is what I meant to say, World Wide Web. And what those stats are is that they were saying the vast majority of AI projects fail. And I think the answer to why that is because the question you just asked is, I don't mean to be overly blunt, but I will be anyway. I think the problem is that you have a lot of poorly defined ROIs on it. So typically when you're doing an ROI, there's a couple of things you're looking for that are really driving it forward. And the justification that usually gets most people's attention is they tend to do something very specific. I am going to save 40 hours a month by doing X, Y, Z, which is great. That's exactly what a CFO wants to hear. The downside is, okay, and now what did you do with those extra 40 hours? And I think that tends to be the biggest reason why it's hard for a lot of organizations to realize the ROI that they're looking for. And that's just where we can start the conversation. There's a few other things we can dig into a little bit further, but I think that's the easiest place to start.
That makes sense to me. And I had a follow-up question, which you may have covered already, but I think it's semi-tangential. What's the difference between AI activity and AI value?
Yeah, great question. I think as people start to adopt I would say that activity itself is a great place to start. It's a good place to actually measure it. As an example, at CIT, we highly encouraged individuals to start using AI and we gave them the guide rails. This is what it looks like. Here's some ideas on things that you can start to use and so forth. And I would say that the activity is pretty low. You get people to start to mess around with it, but you're not getting a whole lot of productivity on it. And we touched on this a little bit last week, but usually what ends up happening is as people are messing with it and toying with it, they don't always have a very specific goal in mind, which keeps them from being extremely productive. And then we talked heavily about the iterative approach of working with AI that will really start to drive the results and the productivity at a later date.
100%. And because you've already thrown out the CFO, I had it on here to say, what would you say to a CFO or another executive who says, show me the proof before I fund or approve more AI work?
Sure. As I mentioned, doing a project or whatever of coming up and saying, I think I'm going to save about this much time in automation. It's a great place to start. But really what the CFO wants to know is what am I getting from that? And there's usually a couple of different things that they're looking for. But again, in the CFO terms, the nitty gritty would be two things. I'm either getting cost savings. So hypothetically, we have the ability to grow the organization by 40% because I've saved all this time without adding headcount. If you can prove that's incredibly powerful. Or the other one is you get additional revenue impact from it. So as an example there is we brought something to market that we didn't have the capacity to do. Therefore, we've generated X amount more leads or X amount of more dollars, which is a great ROI that people can really get their hands around. Those are the things that they're really going to want to see. Again, the time savings is wonderful. It's amazing. And I won't peanut butter it too much or candy coat it. Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. Anyway, at CIT, that's a big initiative of ours is really how are we going to save a bunch of hours? But when we're doing that, what it's allowing us to do is things that we hadn't historically been able to get to. There were always those nice to have things. This is going to be crazy, but hypothetically, you can take a really long-term, big, hairy, audacious goal and kind of mash it down into a couple of weeks or months and saying, because I'm going to get so efficient, I can now do so much more. That would be something that makes sense. But again, that's catapulting the company forward on productivity gains that get to be realized in dollars or revenue.
So many numbers. So last week we talked about the frustration exercise of saying start by listing out your frustrations through AI edit, that sort of approach. But knowing too the amount of AI things that I've done that I haven't said, oh, this is how I'm going to measure it or this is the goal. It's just been, hey, this is a frustration, so I'm going to solve it. When people are measuring AI ROI after the fact and then wondering why the numbers don't add up, what would have been either a better approach or how do you come and do that if I say, hey, Todd, look, I made this and you look great. What's the ROI? And I say, I have no clue.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is the easiest way to answer that. So if I get off track, pull me back. But from my perspective, I do, especially early on with the adoption, I really do like the what's motivating you to do this. And starting with something as this is what really annoys me today is a great place to start. It is a little bit harder, as you mentioned, to then prove that I did indeed get something back for the time spent, but you can get there eventually. As I mentioned, let's just say in marketing, we created a whole bunch of automations, and those automations allowed us to get to more of the market. That also freed up time long term that allowed the marketing team to then do something in addition to doing something very customer focused, creating new webinars, doing a live stream on LinkedIn. These things are going to have longer term things. There are a little bit harder things to measure. So this would be a great example is our stream today. It's hard to pinpoint that this is going to generate additional revenue, but it probably can. And how we justify that is going to be really hard in the early goings of the ROI conversation.
100%. And so we've already started to talk about different scenarios. So what I have prepped for you and what I teased last week is that I have a list of different scenarios and I'm going to give you just the super high level. I edited it down to not have a million different tangential thoughts. And then I want you to tell me how you would measure the ROI on these scenarios.
Oh boy, this
Yep.
feels like a test. I'm going to use AI to help me answer this test. That's good.
Okay, yep, 100%. And if anybody's on LinkedIn, 100%, I'm going to turn on the comments for our stream. So if somebody watching has something that they want Todd to make up an ROI on, 100%, throw it in the comments. Don't just leave me hanging. All right. So the first one that I have is an SOP pipeline. Yes, I had AI generate that title because I had too many thoughts. So this one comes from a real life example. We have a Monday.com board, has 60 plus processes, documentation scattered, living in people's heads, used AI to exact structure and deploy them as formal SOPs, and then layered a Copilot agent in SharePoint so they can query on demand. What's the ROI of that? As Todd goes on mute, no one's.
Yeah, I don't want to answer that one. It was way too complicated. No, somebody knocked on the door, and I didn't want the noise to bleed through. Yeah, it again. This one is a little bit harder to wrap around what it is because I think what you're going to start to realize on the ROI on this one is a little bit harder to generate. This is additional goods sold, or this is an additional bump in revenue. Those are a little bit harder to do. But what I can say you'll start to do, especially with your standard operating procedures, in case anybody didn't know what the SOP is, one of the things a lot of organizations struggle with when you're, I would say SMB just in general, just because most organizations don't have a rigorous process in place in a lot of situations. If you don't have compliance, you probably don't. So as you start to develop your SOPs, that allows you to get really consistent on it. And as an example at CIT, one of the things that we tend to do is when we do things a little bit differently each time, or we have an individual that likes to do it like this instead of the standard way, that it usually ends up causing pain downstream some way or another. You took a step out, you added an extra step, and those types of things don't get communicated through to the rest of the organization. And when that happens, inevitably something breaks. One of the sayings I have at CIT is if something is relying on a single individual, it's one that's not going to work. And that's kind of what happens when you don't standardize things is you've created a new process where I'll just say somebody was being very upfront and they thought they were going to take on all this extra task and then they hand it off to somebody else and say, okay, now take it from here. Well, the person gets it as a hot potato and they get to go, I don't have any idea what you've done to date. How can I possibly make this a success? Because I wasn't involved up until this point. So that would be an easy ROI, if you will. It's not one that's easily measured in cost of goods or revenue, et cetera. But it does long term. Again, just expanding on that briefly is hypothetically, if something that was customer facing and you did this and one of the balls that you were juggling got dropped, you may be looking at giving somebody a credit or a discount or delivering the wrong product, those kinds of things. And when you're having those happen, there is cost associated with them. They're a little bit harder to measure, but they do exist.
100%. All right, you did good. I started off with the really abstract ones, so I swear maybe they get easier. Maybe.
We'll see.
We'll see. All right, we're going to stay in marketing realm just for one more. Marketing email production. So HTML marketing emails used to mean back and forth with the designer going from system to system. Slow, bottlenecked. Now build something like a gem, which is a Gemini agent that drafts production-ready HTML from a prompt. Name the ROI.
Yeah, again, a little bit harder, but there's potential ROIs in this one. A couple of them are now I've got the ability to go at a much faster rate, which more than likely means that as long as I've got enough pipeline of places to send my marketing material, I have the ability to reach a wider audience in a faster pace. So in marketing, I'm sure most people know this, but you're doing a one-to-many communication. And the more you can get, the more reach out there, the more relevant data that's in place, you will start to land more sales. So that would be the easy ROI. And that would be one that you would get a lot of buy-in from someone like myself in the C-suite, CFOs, et cetera, is because that is easy to measure. We did X, the outcome was Y, pretty straightforward, 100% on board.
Awesome. See, I told you this one was going to be easier. All right. So this next one, even more straightforward. Doesn't have to do with the department necessarily. New hire. Before, new hire has to ask a senior person to find a process answer. After, new hire asks a co-pilot agent in SharePoint. Name the ROI.
Freeing up the C-level individual and the leader to be able to continue doing the work. So I'm sure this is fairly obvious, but it probably isn't. So this probably does deserve a little bit more. They say one of the hardest work that's out there is thinking, right? And so a lot of people eventually get into senior levels of management because they have the ability to think a little bit bigger picture, pulling the pieces together, all the orchestration that goes with it. And so when you pull them off of what they're doing, you take them out of I'll use some nerdy business speak, you pull them out of flow, right? As you get going and you're really working, when you get interrupted, your flow goes away. And I'm sure this has happened to nearly everybody in businesses. Once you get pulled away, if you were really cranking through something and you go back to it, you're like, boy, this doesn't feel like the same progress I was making all of 10 minutes ago. And it happens to everybody. So in this situation, that ability to learn what you need, how you need it, asking it in the way that you want, which is what the LLMs allow you to do, that'll makes that individual that's a little bit higher up that used to be the one that was getting communicated to or from, that makes them available to continue in their flow and doing the things that are driving some bigger results that they're after already.
I wanted to raise my hand and go, I have personally been a victim of going out of the phone. Yep, 100%.
It happens to everybody. And it can be something as simple as writing a document, a status SOP. Usually when it happens to me, it's usually something that's a little bit bigger that I had to work up and get going. So I'm, something business related, a new objective, or trying to close the loop on something that I found to be complicated. And so to get pulled out of that flow can be pretty disruptive. And then you start the next thing and you have to go back and it's just a mess.
Just a mess. All right. We got another one. I'm moving away from marketing, moving away from hire. We're going to do sales, everybody's favorite. And we're going to focus on the crowd favorite, RFPs, request for proposals. Because yes, I'm going to define all these acronyms. Historically, reps spend hours writing proposals from scratch every time. And then with AI pulls from past wins, your service catalog, and customer context to generate a first draft. Name the ROI.
Well, the easy one is because you're pulling from things that you've won in the past, you're much more likely to win again in the future. But you also get to have your sellers doing things that are going to help them land more deals, which is more hunting, more closing. Writing RFPs and a long process is going to take a lot longer. So you're not always out there continuing to move down the other things. So the two that I would say is one, again, it kind of gets to that efficiency, which is a little mushy, but it exists. But the other one is that you're much more likely to close the deal, thus driving the value up significantly.
There we go. So there's almost a revenue touch on that one.
If you close a deal, absolutely.
All right, we're going to go back to HR for this next one. Job descriptions and onboarding docs, so more operational. Previously, every new hire role meant rewriting job descriptions and onboarding packets from scratch. With AI, you generate role-specific draftsman template and a few inputs. Name the ROI.
This one's, again, efficiency, so not as great, but it does still exist, right? Depending on what mode your organization is in will dictate how powerful this is. So if you're in a big growth initiative, it allows you to grow at a rate that you wouldn't historically have been able to do without adding a bunch of people to it. So the ROI most likely in this scenario is the fact that I can do twice or whatever that magic number is, 6x the bandwidth with a single individual than I had before, so I can do it at a faster rate. So again, efficiency is a little bit harder to do because it's harder to measure that I actually gained revenue from it. But the fact that I saved costs does work, assuming that I did save costs by not hiring additional people.
You're doing 100%. And my brand strategist, previous brain goes, would you say that this also has consistent language to every single job posting then? And that way your jobs don't look like they were written by two separate people at two separate times?
Yeah, and they will also look like they weren't Frankenstein too. I've used AI recently, and by recently, within the last week, where I have done just that, where I've had a few Frankenstein things together, and I said, please make this look clean and concise. And I went through and cleaned up all of my miscellaneous poorly worded things. It was great.
I think we've all seen to those job descriptions that you can tell are a template and they're answering things and you're going, I don't think that really needed an answer, but I think it was part of a template.
Yep.
100%. All right, we're moving into the world of finance, but not directly revenue. Monthly reporting. Previously, numbers are in a spreadsheet, everybody's favorite. The story around them takes half a day to write. Somebody has to analyze the data and then write a story about it. With AI, you get to turn the data into plain English executive summary in 5 minutes at most. I'm going to call it the TLDR. What's the ROI?
Well, I'm on board because it's TLDR, so I'm already interested. But the ROI is, again, twofold. There's the two that I'm saying is it's cost savings, right? I've now allowed my accounting team or finance team to move at a much faster pace, freeing them up to do other things. The deliverable itself also has a fairly big improvement too. This one will be a bit harder to measure, but the fact that you have, at a minimum, your leadership team getting through the information and getting meaningful output of it quickly has a huge thing. It allows them to make better decisions, better financial decisions, people decisions, operation decisions, et cetera. But it also should then drive the revenue, and hopefully the one that really matters is some of the equity lines of what's going on in the business when it comes to actual finances.
Spending more time on impactful work, less time on trying to explain that you were impactful.
Yep. Yeah. So just give you a little bit of insight of where my brain's going with this is it's great to have numbers in front of you. Most people tend to be pretty busy anyway. One of the major benefits of having a CFO in an organization is they are the ones that are very forward thinking when it comes to the numbers. So they're seeing the numbers and they're saying, this is what I think it means. And it could be anything from this particular product line has a lot of upside, or we saw that the margin on this widget was incredibly high. We want to sell more of them. Now I have the ability to make a decision that says I'm going to put a much finer marketing focus and campaign around this widget because this is something that's great. Companies need it, people buy it, and we make good margin on it. As an example, we are currently in a protein craze. And if you have your favorite cottage cheese and you can't find it in the store, that's because that's what we're in is this world. And so this is a great example is if you have that financial data that says, wow, we're just absolutely at 2,000 capacity building this thing for the cottage cheese industry, then you have the ability to then quickly adapt that into your business saying that's where our focus needs to be. I can now make the thing that we need to do. It's very profitable for us and it's meeting the market need. And if you didn't have the CFO or the financial data that's driving you to those types of decisions, you probably won't make. So there's your ROI. It was really long and windy, but if you ever met me, that's me. Hello, you're welcome.
And we did promise a deep dive into how we would do ROI. So we're delivering on that promise. And internally, I'm cringing because my digestive system would never take on cottage cheese, bro. Because I've heard that out like,
Well, bad example. All right, I'll come up with a better one next time.
that's okay. You got a couple more here. We'll bring it back. Okay. Customer success, meeting recap, and follow up. So after every customer call, someone writes up notes, action items, and a follow-up email. With AI, it transcribes it, summarizes it, drafts the follow-up automatically. Name the ROI.
Again, mostly on efficiencies, but you are also going to get some customer satisfaction increases from this, which the better your customer satisfaction, the higher that you're going to retain a customer, which is ultimately going to drive your lifetime value up. So the longer they stay with you, obviously, the more you generate of revenue there. So that's the long game that you'd get from it, but it's really in between things that get you there. The customer sat thing, I think, is huge. A lot of times you sit in a meeting and you take notes, you think you grab all the stuff that you think was important. But when you have an AI assistant helping you with the transcription and tracking action items, it also has the ability to remind you that you actually need to complete those action items, which sometimes if you're like me, you occasionally write things down. Sometimes you take them notes inside of your PC. And then when your notes are all over the place, it's hard to remember to follow through on all of them, which again gets me back to making sure that I'm delivering a better customer experience, driving additional long-term value from the customer.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you touched on the nothing falling in the cracks, not taking notes, not thinking that you remembered, because I agree. Knowing our calls, we could go 20 different directions, and I'm like, yep, got it, 100%. And then I go back to Copilot and I'm like, oh yeah, I missed those 5 things, but love that for experience. All right. I know this is one of your personal favorites, legal.
Mm.
We're going to go contract review prep, which I know you touched on last week, but I'll scroll throughout the scenario. Reviewing vendor contracts means reading every clause manually. That's historic. With AI, it flags non-standard items, summarizes obligations, and marks risk areas before a human touches it. Name the ROI.
Well, I'm not picking on our legal friends, but the ROI on this one is fairly significant. So it's cost savings on what you would typically do for a variety of reasons. One, usually what I would go do for me personally is I will typically read the contracts first before they pass them on for legal. So I at least already have at least some level of understanding of what I'm looking for that I can then guide legal through. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's where I think the concerns are. So this effort itself is a significant time savings for me, but it also means I can focus on the things that matter much quicker, which reduces the cost of legal long term. That would be really powerful for an organization that does not have internal legal or internal counsel, and you're using outside to help you supplement your organization. So that would be an easy ROI there.
100% getting the vibe that you're like, this one would recommend.
Yeah, so in case anybody didn't know, legal does work up through me, and it does take a lot of time. You don't think there's anything intentional with the way that it happens. It's a complicated process, and the language is complicated enough that understanding it through a quick read is not something that's usually there. There has to be a fairly deep level of understanding before you get to the comprehension that you need. So yes, this would be a 10 out of 10 for me.
We'll go back, we'll rate these later. You just love it about. All right, we're in the last one. We're going to operational. Meeting to action pipeline. Yes, another AI generated title. Historically, everyday meeting produces action items buried in notes that no one reads. With AI extracts decisions and tasks, routes them to the right person or tool, and then logs them, keeping accountability. Name the ROI.
Well, that's a good one. Again, the business benefit to me seems pretty straightforward, and it gets back to the fact that the things aren't falling through the cracks, which does drive a lot of stuff. Again, to me, this is more of an efficiency thing. It probably has a net impact in a couple of different ways. On the most basic level, the fact that you're not forgetting the things. Let me back up. The fact that you're having a meeting means that you're more often than not, as much as the water cooler conversation is great, those meetings aren't usually for that. They're usually there to solve business problems. And if that's true and you've come to an agreement in that meeting that the XYZ thing is going to happen and it's assigned to Joe Smith, if he forgets to do that, you've largely wasted the time that you spent in that meeting, but you're also driving or lack thereof the business outcome that you agreed to. It's very hard to get consensus. It's hard to do if you're from traction world, identify, discuss, and solve problems. So once you've gone through that process, to then not close the loop and wrap it up can cost the business quite a bit of money. So it's not necessarily always a net positive to revenue. It can also keep you from having additional expenses you didn't need to have, which I guess gets back to us some savings and monies, if you will.
100%. Well, in the test of AI ROI, personally, I think that you did great. You made it through all of the scenarios. The toughest part, which as we're getting close to that 30-minute mark, I wanted to leave 5 minutes to go. Was there anything about AI ROI that you were really hoping to touch on, or any, what I'm going to call Todd's tips? I'm going to put it right over my head next time I do.
Oh, I like
About
that. Yeah, I think from my point of view, as you're going down the path of trying to define what it is that you want to accomplish, and you're trying to justify this to your leadership team, be very cognizant of the fact that we talked about this a lot already, is making sure that you've got a tangible return in mind. But I would also put realistic milestones in place. You're not going to gain everything all at once. So hypothetically, if you've got a very large milestone in front of you, goal in front of you. I'll use an example that I would alluded to is I've got an entire year's worth of expectations for what my strategic plan looks like, and I want to condense that into a single quarter. How am I going to do that? By that, I'm not going to take everything for 2026 and I'm going to jam it into quarter one, but I am going to say what I'm trying to get to is I'm trying to take 27's plan and jam it into Q4 this year, potentially. So in order to do that, you have to figure out what you're going to do, what's a realistic milestone that gets you on that path. So as you're having these thoughts and your goals and your milestones, you need to make them very measurable and make sure the expectations are clear. So that would be the biggest thing for me, is making sure that you've got a very strong goal with measurables that you can actually hit and measure, of course, to make sure that you're actually doing what you want.
100%. You mean actually give people something to work towards instead of just saying, hey, use AI?
Yes. And we are using AI to do that. But the saying that I use with our leadership team a lot is, if you measure it, you tend to improve it. And we statistically prove that year over year. If we focus on it and we measure it, we can actually have an impact on it. If we just throw something out there that's a little nebulous, while we may accomplish it, we don't usually drive the needle in the direction we're looking for.
Makes sense. All right. Well, you did it. You stayed on topic. You only tangented once, maybe. I feel like now I have all of these things I can put in my back pocket of going, Todd's going to ask me this. So thank you. This was very productive for my own.
My pleasure.
But thanks to anybody too that joined in on LinkedIn on a Monday afternoon and listened to us. We're going to be back with one more LinkedIn Live next week. I'm bringing Kyle back, CIT's president and CEO, and we're going to chat through any of the AI news between now and next week, which I'm guessing will still be something that I have to have AI sort through, but we'll be back. That'll be 10 a.m. next Monday. I'll be caffeinated. But for anybody listening, if you want to listen in after that, you can head out to citsolutions.net/podcast, if I can get that all out in one breath. And we'll be back. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening. If you liked today's episode, share your thoughts with us. Like, subscribe, or reach out at info@citsolutions.net. For more, visit citsolutions.net/podcast. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.